you want devoted followers who leave their families for you, give their money to you, give their bodies to you, give up their lives for you, consider you God, and will kill for you? Don't you want to become a cult leader?
They're alive because you blaspheme the Holy Ghost. You have to die.
Since the death of God, there's been a vacancy open. You could fill that void. Here's how.
Give me our seat.
No. Got it. Not Jesus. Dad is told me.
Howdy, I'm Ciaran Warner. I'm a reporter who's trying to take down a cult called The Body.
Too weird? The answer to that question is yes, by the way. So I'm hoping that the lighting and the setup for this is a little better than it was in the last video. This is actually my boyfriend's old streaming mic, so I'm just using it to test out to see if it brings us better audio. And if it does, thank God. My audience is currently like rejoicing and pissing and screaming and crying right now because it took 5 years for this to finally happen. I apologize to any dedicated viewers of mine who had to deal with piss stain audio from my iPhone. Do I still edit with an iPhone? Yes. Will that ever change? Probably not. This is Ciaran Warner.
Howdy, I'm Ciaran Warner. I'm a reporter trying to take down a cult called The Body.
Ciaran is an independent reporter I recently came across on TikTok. Ciaran has dedicated his social media platforms and a website to this ongoing story that he's been reporting on that I think deserves more media attention.
Well, the story starts with this guy named Mark B. who shows up in Alaska 20 years ago. He finds this little faith group, sort of inserts himself as the leader, and all of a sudden, he's Jesus.
Ciaran's account had a pretty large following on TikTok, so his page has been making its way around the algorithm, and I am so glad that it made it to mine, because this is a very interesting story I think YouTube needs to hear as well. When you go on YouTube or Google, the only person that seems to apparently be reporting or bringing attention forward about this case is Ciaran. Well, I decided to hear Ciaran out and do some of my own research, and I think if you're interested in cult stories, or even stories about stopping a modern-day cult, you're gonna find this case incredibly interesting and just wild. So introducing Alaska's conservative Christian congregation, The Body.
What's that? Is that a religious movement? He claims to be Jesus or whatever his latest thing is, but he's actually raping children. Yeah. So the religion is really neither here nor there. But it operates as a classic cult. A psychopath wants to control other people. And psychopaths, cruel, they have no empathy, they're often sexually abusive because of their own needs. If we look at the results of brainwashing, this isn't a theoretical thing. This is a real life thing. The results of brainwashing are that people get made to do awful things or accept awful things. They get torn away from their families. They're not allowed to think their own thoughts. They're not allowed to make their own choices about their sexual lives. They very often are sexually abused. They may be physically abused. They may have to reject their children. Cult scholars do have various definitions, but they're all essentially the same.
Mm-hmm.
The Body International is a religious group formed in 2003 under the leadership of a man only known, for legal purposes, as Mark be. The little knowledge of this cult that exists out there on the internet is almost near impossible to find. With such a simple cult name as The Body, it's easy to see why in search results you'll often never get any direct result information from such a simple Google term. And even if you narrow the search down to The Body International in Alaska, there's a number of different cults outside of just The Body that will randomly pop up. And I gotta ask, like, Alaska, what the fuck is up with that? I found like 4 separate cults in Alaska just by trying to look into this specific cult. Why are there so many in Alaska? I mean, I guess when you live in a place where you only get like 3 hours of sunlight, you can basically get away with doing anything in the dark, because nighttime is basically all day. The cult started out as a few families coming together in isolation to form a Christian Baptist movement in the Kenai Peninsula of Alaska. For tax-exempt purposes, the founders have attempted to file this group under a different name called Sought Out as a religious non-profit organization. This group has no website, no social media, no phone number or address. It was only in 2007 did the first documentation from inside the cult began to surface. And under many different aliases, the Body International made record of their existence with the state of Alaska. Before 2007, the Body International was attempting to buy land in Nikiski, Alaska, which is on the west side of the Kamal Peninsula. The reasoning for owning this land was to establish a shell company. And no, I'm not talking like selling seashells down by the Alaskan seashore or anything. I fucking nailed that tongue twister, holy shit! Or shell as in, the gas company. A shell company, in economic terms, is a company or corporation that exists only on paper and has no office and no employees, but may have a bank account or may hold passive investment or be the registered owner of assets. Shell companies exist to be basically like a transactional business to obtain financials and maintaining conglomerate control over a company. This would basically allow these companies that own shell companies or do financial business through shell companies more favorable tax treatment and facilitate money laundering. So on top of being tax exempt for being a religious nonprofit, this shell company also gives them the opportunity to conceal information on where their money is coming from, or even where it's even going. And despite these shell companies being tied to fraud, embezzlement, and corruption, they aren't necessarily illegal in the United States. In terms of shell companies, the United States did place a ban on shell companies owned by anonymous entities, but if you really wanted to, you could require an LLC of a shell company and start shuffling your money through that tax-free with no trace of that money's movement whatsoever. Now, I'm not encouraging that or suggesting that taxation is theft or anything. Everything except for that last part. Speaking of avoiding taxes, the Body has registered their IP as a religious nonprofit because they always attempt to do that, which is how they were able to obtain land in the Kenai Peninsula. They ended up settling south of Oregon, right along the coastline. This property in particular has potential for a pipeline build and is allegedly worth a lot of money. The residents of the Body have captured film of their living conditions as each family is given refuge in an $800 tent that, I'm not gonna lie, looks worse than my dad's tent with 4 built-in bedrooms that I am positive has cost him less. Whatever these families were capable of giving to this land, they were willing to pay it to live there. But these families have a ton of different tents built up. Like there's teepees and party tents and temporary tents and what have you. We all know this from this post from a member who is only known as Peter Q.
We've got a block of land here that is about 17 acres, but it's long and thin, and it's right beside the shoreline.
We don't know much about who Peter is, other than he's been posting about the layout of the property to his personal social medias that have no affiliation with the cult.
Each of us has built our own tent or building of some description. This is mine. Looks a little unorthodox, but we got it up here, and I'm the only one that has an actual yard. Everyone else has forest.
His videos show us temporary tents that were built up, as well as a built-in fence area for his particular tent, giving him sort of a makeshift backyard, and a teepee for a family of 6. He also captures view of the coastline. Peter also goes on to mention that he has 2 wives. We'll talk about one of his other wives in a minute.
Coming up into the picture now is my second wife. You've probably seen pictures of her before. but I'm not proud, I'm not ashamed.
So testimony from those who got out of the cult say it was kind of regular for these families to be polyamorous with each other and have multiple children. And all of these survivors testified the same weird transfer that the practice became from worshiping God to then sexual coercion and abuse.
Like, they do these things called washings, where they would, like, it sounds like a perversion of Passover to me, where you wash people's feet and instead, like, everybody gets naked and they wash each other's bodies. There's on-record testimony about this. They basically ended up trying to, like, hash out in front of the judge what was abuse and what wasn't abuse, and if anybody'd ever, like, done any of these washings to any of the kids that were in the church. It's really, really bonkers stuff.
To discuss the founder a little bit, keep in mind that most of what we know about his early history is fairly hidden at this point, but audio recordings have been released of his gospel. So what exactly have we learned about Mark and his practices?
M-A-R-C W-A-D-E B-I-S-S-E-T.
Mr. Bissett, are you married to Lois Bissett?
Yes.
And Mariah Bissett is the youngest child of the marriage, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And how old is Mariah?
Almost 17. A couple of months away.
Now, when did you leave the family home approximately?
When I was chased out on a false allegation, false report from the police.
No, my question was when?
Excuse me, I can't remember. I think it was late October, early November.
Now, you are a member of the body or the people, or is it sometimes known sought out, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And how often does Mariah attend the general meeting?
She comes, I would imagine she's come once in the last, she might attend general meetings. I think she came once this last month. She can come and go as she pleases.
And at least until today, she had a car, is that correct?
Yeah, yes, sir.
And so if you go to a general meeting and she has her car, she can come if she wants, or
yes, sir.
Not. And what about the weekly women's meetings? Does she participate in those?
She hasn't for quite some time. She does every now and then. She didn't this Thursday.
Now, let me clarify a couple things about Mark B. So, in order to avoid, being sued, I've gone out of my way to try and only refer to the leader as Mark B to keep from making sweeping general accusations on an individual with a specific name in mind. However, a registered business in connection with the Body International and Sought Out was formed under the registered name Mark Wade Bissett. So here's what's interesting about the company registered under the name Mark Wade Bissett. This company was formed in Minnesota a couple of months after Siren Warren, the guy I mentioned earlier, brought this story to TikTok. What's interesting is that Siren lives in Minnesota.
So periodically I look up search terms for the body, for people involved and businesses that are associated, whatever. So I was just like futzing around doing my search terms, and I found this company that is called Mark Wade Bissett. Mark Wade Bissett. It is a business entity in Minnesota. I live in Minnesota, and this fucking scared the shit out of me. This company was registered in Minnesota, filed in Tonasket, Washington. It was filed, the address is Tonasket, Washington. The business is Mark Wade Bissett. This is just super creepy. So I have never named the leader of this cult that I'm after, the body. Because, I don't want to get sued, and that would be defamation to say all these terrible things about this child abusing, family separating, molesting, infant abusing con artist who goes by Mark B. I just am not going to say his name. But a business, I can name a business. If you filed with a record with Minnesota under Mark Wade Bissett, I can say that. And I can say it was filed in Tonasket, and I can show everyone the paperwork. I could be talking about any Mark B when I talk about Mark B, but a business that sure as shit does not belong in my state, named Mark Wade Bissett, I can say that 100 times. Mark Wade Bissett. What the fuck are you doing here?
Now listen, I can't definitely say that this Mark Wade Bissett guy is running an Alaskan cult and registering companies under his own name in Minnesota, because ultimately, that's just an accusation. But just understand that testimony of those dispelled from the cult all mention a founder named Mark B, and the Body International has a company under the name Mark Wade Bissett. It's just a weird coincidence that I'm not at all referring to in saying that this is his actual legal name by any means. So anyways, Mark B, in comparison to like most cult leaders that we know of, is pretty run-of-the-mill. In comparison to like most of the cult leaders that we've seen in our history, he's basically like the same as like all of them. Mark claims to be a living deity with a direct line of communication with God, because they all do. But it's very clear from Mark's own testimony that his communications from God is just an excuse to get away with profoundly strange sexual behavior. And I say it in this manner because the Body has an interesting ritual that is partaken in not just by Mark, but by other members of the cult called the washing. There's a pretty well-known Bible story about how Jesus washes the feet of his disciples, written in John verse 13, 14 through 17, quote, "If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you should do as I have done to you. Most assuredly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them." So this is just my interpretation of this passage. This specific act was done so that Jesus could teach his students that it doesn't matter whether your status is lower class or higher class. If you set a good example, others should follow that example. But it also points out that these acts of kindness don't have statuses. All forms of kindness should be celebrated by whoever performs them, and they should set an example for other people. I wonder how Mark B interprets that message.
I walk into the yurt, and Mark and Gary and two ladies, they are dancing around in a trance-like state, speaking in tongues. I get pushed into just a few feet in front of the door, and he began to disrobe me. My father-in-law, my boss, and the elder in the church took my clothes off of me. My job, my family, and basically being in that body, that I would be cut off. And there was still at the time, there was this, I will do anything for God. And then Mark took his bare hands and washed my whole body, fondled me for a bit. He felt every part of my body and washed me.
Did he talk to you while he was doing it?
He was speaking in tongues. He did. When he got down to my private parts, he said, "Is this defiled? Is this dirty? Me touching you here?" And then after he was done, and he said, "Now, touch my body. Touch every part of my body."
Mark told me that my son was the first one that he washed, and he stood there naked in front of him and Gary, and they washed him from head to foot.
Including genitals.
Yes, sir.
Oh, great. Now, the washing would be bad enough if it weren't this naked song and dance that the followers were not given informed knowledge of, but it's been reported that this weird washing ritual has also been done with minors.
Said that she knows that their 16-year-old daughter went through a washing. We don't know who did it.
The washing is where followers would be summoned by Mark B, and a bunch of women would dance around naked speaking tongues. And Mark B, also speaking in tongues, would then wash a person's entire naked body. This testimony from a man who remains anonymous tells the details of his washing ceremony. And when he was dispelled from the group, he was told that his 16-year-old daughter would be washed in his absence. A fun fact, but in audio recordings of his sermons, Mark B. refers to Jesus as Daddy, and his daddy apparently is guiding him to abusing these children.
No, Daddy, not Jesus, Daddy told me. He said, you've done all I required of you, and I will require no more.
But not only that, if any of his members were to stand up against him, Mark B's Daddy Jesus tells him that it is important that any naysayers are to be put to death, because those speaking up against Mark B are essentially going up against God's word.
Holy Ghost, you have to die. You have to. Quickly. So I'm calling forth on Jared. I already called today. He's dead.
Yeah. It's over.
He will not last a month. Won't.
Mark B in the body is also known to separate families. And I'm not just referring to like blocking out the rest of these people's friends and families like outside of the community, but also cutting ties from fellow members indefinitely.
There's this process in the body where when a member is of no use or they want to split up couples, separate families, somebody gets kicked out, somebody gets the boot. Now what you need to know about Melissa right away is that she used to be married to this guy Craig, and they had 6 kids together. One thing to know is that Mark had everything recorded in the body because his words were holy. He's the Son of God. And so there's a recording of Craig getting kicked out. Craig gets kicked out, Melissa's staying in the cult, and this starts a divorce and a custody case. But then recordings of Mark surfaced, because Craig had all this stuff on his phone, and Mark just decided no more custody case. And then Mark has this idea to send her off to this new sect he started. So Melissa is on the other side of the world in this new sect. She is married to Katie's dad, Peter Q, who runs the sect in Australia. So there's a guy in Australia who found out about the body because they were trying to recruit him and his wife. And here he is talking about Melissa.
Yeah, and that's the thing with Melissa. When I look at Melissa and I go, she has 6 kids, and the youngest was 2 when she left. Like, I have 3 kids, and I just think there's no way in the world, unless somebody has like chained me up and dragged me away, that I would walk away from or leave. There's no way in the world.
Melissa Parker is a member of the body who was married to this man, Craig. Craig and Melissa had 6 children in the cult. And one day, Craig was dispelled from the cult. And there is audio of him actually being kicked out.
You forgot to smile at me. No, serious. It's serious. This is your life and your death. You can walk away under these terms. I'll give you the grace to walk away.
Mr. Mark, I don't want to walk away.
I'll give you the grace to walk away.
I don't want to walk away.
Did you hear me?
I hear you. I don't want to walk away.
And here's the grace. You'll resurrect in Abraham. But you walk away from here accusing, it's over.
This banishment began a divorce and custody battle, which roped in the entirety of the cult into this legal dispute. Needless to say, Craig has had a lot of information to help him win this case. This includes testimonials of previous members, testifying sexual abuse, and all of the money laundering that was occurring to help this cult keep the land that they were on. Perhaps because Mark B knew he wouldn't be able to justify these crimes in court, he most likely convinced Melissa to drop the kids off with Craig, abandoning her 6 children, the youngest of which was only 2 years old.
Mark finds out that we've got the recordings, that we're about ready to level them. She brings my 2-year-old daughter, drops her off, 2 years old, drops her off in the middle of the driveway, drops all of her stuff off, and leaves to never see these kids again. And it just leaves my daughter just absolutely devastated. You know? I mean, she abandoned, I have 6 kids.
She was probably talked into doing this so that the Body International would avoid a legal dispute, outing them to the rest of the world. Mark B's reasoning was because God told him that abandoning children was the right thing to do. And remember Peter, the Australian guy I talked about earlier with his footage that was released to the public? Well, Peter Q actually is the owner of the Body International of Australia and actually owns a congregation and some land in Australia.
Yeah, I know the group is in Australia right now.
The cult?
Yeah, my mom is actually married to Katie's dad right now.
No way.
Yeah, no cap.
and he is now Melissa's new husband. So to clarify where we're at, the Body International has land in Alaska, Australia, and through this Mark Wade Bissett company has land in Minnesota. Another story of family separation is the story of a woman named Carrie.
So the guy I was with, his name is Chris. His wife Carrie, so she was kicked out a year before. So she was kicked out she was out in April of 18. She's still waiting to go back. She still hasn't held the child that she gave birth to. They've still got her 2 daughters, and she has no. Well, I don't know, she might have something to do with it, but she, that's what's that, nearly 3 years, and she's still so deep into the cult mindset, she's never broken out of it, even though she's living in Pennsylvania.
She is an ex-member, and her children are unfortunately still stuck in the body. Why they're still there isn't exactly known. My theory is that maybe she has a spouse in the body, which is the children's father, that is keeping them there. But anyways, the running narrative about Carrie's story is that after she had given birth to one of her children, the body immediately took that child away from her. This was only hours after she had given birth. She apparently failed to show up for a custody battle and has been practically hiding out somewhere in Pennsylvania ever since. But the whereabouts of her own children are unknown. So how have we come to know about all of this? Well, Siren Warner, the reporter I spoke about earlier, has been collecting testimonials and all of this information about this cult and has dedicated an entire website to archive all of this information. But how exactly did Siren Warner himself heard about this story? Well, actually, the story about how Siren Warner came across the body was actually through looking into a completely separate story that somehow the Body International got interwoven with, and it all ultimately ties back to the murder of Genghis Muscat.
911, where is your emergency?
I killed somebody.
Okay, what do you mean you killed somebody? What happened?
We heard a yell, for, somebody, I heard a yell for help.
Now, when we were walking up to the car, you told me that you executed him. That's kind of a strong word. So
I eliminated the target. The next thing I knew, survived, and I was ready to, go on to the next mission.
Genghis Muscat was only 27 years old when he was shot to death by his U.S. Army vet friend, Paul Vermillion. Genghis was described as a free-spirited man who lived in a boathouse in San Francisco. He was a Minnesota native who had seen his fair share of the law, with his drinking habits getting him arrested for drunk driving. And at some point he was facing animal cruelty charges for tossing his dog named Coffee Bean into the harbor. His charges were ultimately dropped for this only if he had agreed to have his dog fixed before authorities returned the dog back to him. He left for Alaska after this and joined a tree climbing company where he met with Paul Vermillion. Paul was a U.S. veteran who was sent to fight during the Iraq War. He was diagnosed with PTSD, which Genghis would help aid Paul where he could. As a U.S. vet, Paul faced obstacles like possible homelessness and job insecurities with his mental diagnosis. But Genghis remained a constant as his friend. But their relationship was rocky. As a friendship, it was clear that they were both incredibly toxic to each other, coping with their mental illnesses with constant drinking. Genghis had told a friend of his early on in his friendship with Paul that he had seen Paul switch personalities on him seemingly out of nowhere. Paul forgot who Genghis was and thought that he was intruding in his home, so he held a rifle in Genghis's face. This is what we like to call in the business unfortunate foreshadowing. On December 5th, 2013, Paul invited Genghis over late that night because mental health-wise, he was having a very hard time. Genghis usually helped his friends solve his slumps with excessive drinking, and that's where things turned incredibly sour. Paul's testimony for that night went as follows. He and Genghis were just drinking and talking when all of a sudden they got into this fight about something. Genghis had threatened to kill Paul and got him in a chokehold. When the police arrived and found Genghis, he was found dead with a shot to the head and multiple to his torso. Police found in their investigation that 3 weapons were were used. The first was Paul's rifle, which was used to shoot Genghis in the back of the head, a shotgun for his torso, and an ice axe that was used after his death.
And the ice axe, the shotgun, and the .30-06 used in combination suggests rage.
It was also found that with an analysis of the crime scene, it suggests that Genghis tried to escape the situation, that he was almost trying to run out the door, but he unfortunately was killed immediately by Paul's .30-06 rifle. By the time Paul went to trial in 2016 for this crime, he was given a plea deal. 2.5 years in prison. The main reason this deal was met was due to the fact that self-defense was on the table. And with the possibility of self-defense being there, what also had to be considered was just how violent this attack really was. I mean, Paul used like 3 separate weapons to mutilate Genghis's body. Genghis's own mother went on to say that her son was a bit mouthy and would get himself in deep trouble with the dumb things that he would say. But he was never a violent person as Paul claims. Paul had explained to officers on the scene that he killed Genghis executioner style and that he had eliminated the threat and was ready for the next mission. And of course this could stem from his mental illnesses and his PTSD, but I don't know, maybe it's just me, but if you're killing a person executioner style where you have the gun pointing to the back of their head, then the only way you'd be able to get behind them in the first place is if you had the upper hand and was able to get into a position of power where you were able to put that gun behind his head. Now, what does this have anything to do with The Body International? Well, when Siren Warner was actually looking into this story in 2016, there was a lot of political tension with this case. Alaska is an open carry state where you don't need a license to conceal carry. So a lot of people who heard Paul's testimony thought he had the rights to self-defense, and he wasn't guilty of this crime. You know, the standard stand your ground folks, you know, the people who think that 3 weapons are viable in use of self-defense. I need to preface this. A shotgun, a rifle, and a fucking axe is self-defense to these people. Anyway, and during his investigation, Siren was introduced to this woman who claims to know things about the case that apparently nobody else knew.
At a certain point, I found a source who claimed to have all kinds of information about this story that I didn't know, and we just started talking all the time.
I'm going to tell you right now, I could potentially have a lot for you, right? I could have the answer to every question that you've got.
Now, she's definitely in the stand your ground camp. She thinks the killer is innocent.
I'm looking at homicide that's obviously homicide that got pled down to manslaughter.
Whoa, buddy, whoa. Back up just 1 second there, but okay.
What do you mean?
I mean, whoa.
It becomes crystal clear that she knows this guy, the killer, and she's been advocating for him in outrageous ways.
I had an encounter with God the day that I met Paul, which is the reason why I'm involved. I don't know that I ever told you this, but I approached him and I was like, I'm going to fight for you in every way I know how. You know, and I talked to everyone.
And what makes it, like, super outrageous is that this stuff she's doing on the side, trying to exonerate this guy, it is the biggest conflict of interest I've ever heard of. It's the most outrageous conflict of interest, and some people in Alaska might know why.
But it became very clear to Siren that this woman was very much in defense of the killer and was actively trying everything in her power to actually cut a deal with law enforcement on Paul's behalf. What eventually came out later after Paul's 2.5-year sentence was completed was that this source that Siren got connected with was actually a member of the Body International.
Is this the gal from Australia? Have you heard about the cult she's in? Don't tell her I told you, but yeah, ask her about the religious organization she's a member of.
Well, she's told me that she's religious, but that's as far as it's gone.
They're religious.
Now, I didn't take this cult story seriously at first. Then in 2018, this cult story was like confirmed beyond a shadow of a doubt.
How do I put this politely? I investigated her for quite some time while I was there. which caused us to clash. He was a member of a group that I would call a cult in Nikiski, which is pretty close by.
Now, why a body member would want to get so heavily involved in this case, no one really knows for sure at this moment, but it's interesting that the Body International would be so interested in Paul Vermillion. I mean, maybe they wanted to recruit him into their cult, a serial killer with severe mental illnesses, to their commune that is populated with tons of children. But anyway, I really honestly couldn't tell you. Now, as much as I appreciate Siren's efforts into bringing this story to the internet, it's not, of course, without its criticism. Now, keep in mind, me saying all these criticisms is not in any way trying to discredit Siren's work so far. He's been collecting information since 2020. He's been working on this story for 2 whole years. So what I'm about to say is not to try to cancel him or to discredit him in any way. This cult is very real and it deserves to be brought to the public. I just think Siren is a little nutty.
Because we were in a cult, and cults don't like people actually being attached to each other.
Siren Warner is an investigative journalist who seems to be the only journalist who was originally reporting about this cult in 2020 when his investigation began. Siren has created a whole website dedicated to storing all types of information about the Body International and other cult-related stories. But his efforts in getting this story out there has been questionable, more specifically referring to the threat that he made on Senator Mitch McConnell's life. No, I'm not kidding. This man legitimately threatened a sitting congressman in order to get his story about a cult in Alaska out in the mainstream. I don't think I need to tell you that it didn't work.
Made a file on my Google Drive that has all the information about my plot to assassinate Mr. McConnell. And I think some federal agent should come and take everything off my hard drive.
Now listen, look, I don't like Mitch McConnell, okay? And if you don't like Mitch McConnell, that's all fine and dandy. We agree on that one. If you do like him, that is also fine. But I don't think I need to tell you guys how backwards and crazy the idea is to threaten the life of a sitting senator to get your cult story out there. First of all, Mitch McConnell is the representing state senator for Kentucky. What the fuck Mitch McConnell has anything to do with an Alaskan cult is beyond me. I mean, if you had threatened, I don't know, Dan Sullivan or Sarah Palin or whoever the fuck else from Alaska, that would at least make sense. Plus, if the FBI and Secret Service actually took this threat seriously, Siren would be in prison for threatening a sitting Congress member. And I'm shocked that they honestly didn't take this more seriously. I'm surprised that Siren didn't face any jail time for this, really. He said on the call that he didn't have any weapons on him, but he did have cannabis in his home. At the time, cannabis was only allowed for medical purposes in Minnesota. So it's like this man was asking to go to prison.
I don't know. I don't know if there's anything weapon-like. I mean, there's a bong. I have marijuana in my house too. I am definitely.
You have marijuana?
Yes. Yes. And I plan on selling it to the first person that I see. That's illegal in Minnesota. I'm gonna sell my marijuana to fucking school kids.
And if you're the only reporter reporting on this story, why the hell would you intentionally put negative press on yourself from the FBI and would risk going to prison and having your access to your research restricted because you're in a jail cell? Make it make sense, please. It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. The way that Siren, explains this situation is that he was trying to intentionally be interrogated by the FBI so that he can kind of coerce the FBI into talking to him about this cult. But sir, they're not here to talk about your cult story. They're bringing you in because you threatened a sitting senator. It makes no sense. And ultimately, it didn't bring any attention to anything. What did bring media attention to this cult was when arrests were made and the children of the cult were finally saved.
Hey man, you want to step out of the vehicle for me?
No, thank you.
So, just so you know, you're being audio and video recorded right now, Chris.
Fine.
Go ahead and keep your hands on that steering wheel. Okay. Keep your hands on that steering wheel. Yeah. You know why we're here to talk to you.
Why is that?
as of May of this year, the cult attempted to make the move to Tonasca, Washington, where they were met by police. The police's main concern for investigating this cult was due to the sketchy guardianship of the parents of these children. Because the body is so well known for kicking parents out and keeping the children, some of these children were rehomed to members of the cult. But these parents' guardianship and adoption was in question when they made that move to Washington. Because technically speaking, they didn't go through the legal process of adopting these kids. So they were arrested for obstruction of justice. The cult claims to be a group of sovereign citizens where they claim that children don't have to go through the adoption process because children in the cult are perceived as property.
You came to my house, you kicked down my door, you stole my property, my daughter's. I get a call from the babysitter and CPS, and you guys kick the door down and steal my property.
Chris.
Yes.
I see your daughter right now, bud. Right?
My property is my business.
I respect that this child is in the back seat right now.
I don't have a child in this car. This is my property. Why did they send you guys out right after they got served? To kick down my door and steal my daughters? Oh, I wonder. Why were you sent out without even a verified claim to kick down my door and take my things? Kick down your door, take your stuff, take your property.
So far, there have only been 2 cult arrests, and the body cam footage is available for both arrests. And when both families were taken into police custody, both had the same excuse to police. They both claim that their children are their property, and that the police have no right to take their property without permission. Children are considered their own citizens with their own agency in the United States. So to hear this means that the cult justifies this sexual cruelty through degrading the children of the cult to objects of ownership. And it becomes even more tragic when you consider that these kids are often abandoned, traded amongst cult members, and oftentimes moved from one state or country to the other without warning or say. In due time, I do hope that these arrests lead to a full investigation and more coverage into this cult. Because at this point, I don't know if Siren can really do all of this on his own. He seems to have delved into propagation and becoming a provocateur to get his message out there, which I personally think is incredibly dangerous to do and completely counterproductive when kids are on the line, especially when those kids are facing sexual abuse. So why did I, of all people, decide to cover this? Well, for one, I think that cult stories are interesting. I'm very fascinated with cults. But also, I think that underground cults like these, with very little information about them being so blatant and how awful they are, is kind of horrifying, because you'd think with all of this sexual abuse that's going on, it'd be a little more well known. But like this anonymous member had said in his interview, he would have done anything for God. And that includes keeping silent on his own sexual abuses for years.
And there was still at the time, there was this, I will do anything for God.
And especially with cults, because there are so many members that are keeping silent and willing to just throw you to the wayside at any given moment, I think sexual abuse in a cult-like setting is completely unreported most of the time, and people in cults get away with sexual abuse way more often. And as an advocate for people who are victims of sexual abuse, sexual coercion, or even like sexual assault, cult stories just get under my skin in a certain way. And I feel like this story in particular, and even more stories out there, because apparently there's like 4 million cults in Alaska for whatever fucking reason, need more media attention. If you guys remember what happened with Jonestown was a congregation that was led by Jim Jones, a crazy man who convinced his followers that he could heal through the power of God. He convinced 900 people to move to Guyana, where they seemingly created a communist cult. And when people from the US, including senators, would visit the cult, Jim Jones would convince his people that this was a sign from God that they were coming after them to take away their freedom. As a result of of the ongoing pressure from the FBI to investigate Jonestown, and after the death of a prominent senator that visited the town, Jim Jones convinced 900 people to poison themselves, making it the largest mass homicide in U.S. history outside of the U.S. border. The reason I think that cults should be taken more seriously and should be investigated more often is because of things like Jonestown. And not even things like Jonestown, things like the Anthill kids. People are getting hurt in cults. Anytime a cult is established, it is inevitable that people are manipulated and they get hurt. And like I even spoke about in the last video, it is very important to even point out the characteristics of a cult when looking at just a general group of people, because those people can inherit cult-like behaviors without even realizing that they're a cult themselves. What's so interesting though about the body, and given the people who are in the cult still, they acknowledge they're a cult. That's the whole reason why they don't want to be part of social media, is because they know deep down they're a cult. And most people really have a negative connotation with cults, given the fact, of course, that it has led to mass suicide or horrific murder. I would definitely love to talk about more cult stories, especially cult stories of the modern era, because there are so many underground cult stories that are happening to this very day that not a lot of people know about. I mean, you guys remember that Love Is One cult? I've been so fucking fascinated. That one's wild. I'm hoping that with more information that comes out about the body, that I will give you guys an eventual update. Also, follow Siren Warner on TikTok. He's a bit of a nut, he's a bit loony, but he's the only one that is collecting most of the prominent information about the members of the cult and the cult itself. So I do still encourage you look at his website and go onto his TikTok. Check out his documentary as well about the body. It's about like 29 minutes, I think. But that is today's video. Hopefully it won't be a nightmare to edit. Now, see, here's the thought process that's going on in my head, right? This video's script is predominantly shorter than most of the scripts that I write up, mainly because the information is just very minuscule at the moment. So I'm hoping that editing doesn't take me super duper long. But given my need to go above and beyond everything that I'm capable of, it's probably going to take me forever to even edit this video, and even though it might end up being probably like 30 minutes, it's probably going to end up taking me forever still. So see you guys in maybe August or something, I don't know. Hey, you guys want to see something cool? Because I think this might actually block some. This is fuck. This is fuck. This is my son. He has a friend too, look. This is Beans. You want to show him Beans? Beans. If anyone is wondering mentally how I'm doing right now, yeah. Thank you so much for dedicating your time to visiting my channel. Make sure you follow me on all of my social medias, they're all there. And also watch some of my other content, because I think it's good. And if you do want to see more cult stories, I am more than willing to cover them, because it is that niche of mine that I'm very fascinated with. So please, leave some suggestions of cults that you want me to talk about in the comments, or whatever you want me to talk about, I don't know. I like true crime too, I can talk about that. I'm asking, because I'm running out of ideas, okay? And with that, I think we're gonna call it there. Thank you guys for watching.